Hello. This is a follow-up to the piece I did about rejection a while ago. These are all novels which have been submitted to me. I haven't actually worked editorially on any of them or signed up the authors. But they're all things that caught my eye, all things that I gave kind of close attention to, and hopefully the reasons why they caught my eye will be of interest and value to you. There's quite a lot to get through, so I'm just going to move straight on. So this first one is about a man. It's set in Dublin in the present day. It's a crime novel. He specialises in finding young actors who unknown actors to appear in films, and he's approached by the mother of a teenager who's gone missing to help her find her child. And that seemed to me kind of quite an interesting milieu. The film world, the crime world, a bit of an undercurrent, of sort of darker undercurrent there. And he's potentially quite an interesting detective figure, a slightly unusual detective figure. But also, perhaps it needs another element or two for it to really kind of work and have enough narrative impetus. So it didn't quite work for me. This next one, set in Rome in the 1960s, a young woman joining her soldier fiance. She's lonely, but the neighbours kind of involve her in their lives and their dressmaking business. There's a warmth to it. This is very much, it's women's fiction. It's a summer read. But, you know, Rome in the 1960s seems like a place I'd happily spend some time in. And I can imagine other people wanting to spend some time in. I don't think ultimately the story had enough to it to really work. But you know, but I did like, you know, I love the setting, and I can see other people loving the setting. This next one is also historical, set in Korea in the Second World War. Young British soldier who's escaped from the Japanese, a Korean comfort woman who's also escaped from the Japanese. They kind of are thrown together. There's a love story. There's this epic backdrop. There's this sort of strange, interesting and kind of perhaps slightly exotic world or milieu it's set in. And I thought there were lots of elements to that would be fantastic. This is an instance where perhaps there's almost too many elements, because the story seemed to kind of meander and go on and lose focus. So in the end, it didn't quite work out for me. But it was of, you know, real interest. This next one is commercial women's fiction. A young woman who is bereaved, her husband's died, and she discovers a toy telephone with which she can call heaven. And that's instantly caught my eye. It's very rare that one gets ideas that seem to me to be something I've never heard before, and this kind of fell into that category. And it also seemed to have, there's a kind of warmth and I mean it's funny, but it's also, there's a kind of empathetic warmth to that. I think we all would like to have a telephone with which we could call heaven, and I think we all have our moments of trying to call heaven. So it seemed like something that, you know, people could relate to, but that idea in and of itself isn't really enough to sustain a whole story. It certainly isn't enough to sustain a novel, and it needed more, and that was perhaps missing. And then finally, this is a novel about a classical musician. He's a young man. His career's at a bit of a crossroads, and he catches things aren't working. His life isn't quite working out, and he catches a glimpse of the charismatic woman who was the sort of love of his teenage years, who disappeared from his life 14 years ago, and that reignites all his old flames and obsessions, and throws his life into kind of into chaos, and he goes searching for her, and that seemed to be an interesting and attractive, well, perhaps slightly dark, but something that, you know, a narrative that I felt, you know, one would be interested to follow. And with the kind of classical music and sort of all sorts of elements that were potentially of interest. I don't think it didn't quite work, and so ultimately I said no, but it caught my eye. Now, that's a pretty random selection. I haven't looked too hard. I certainly haven't tried to select these with any kind of message in mind. I think, though, there is a kind of message that comes through, which is that they all take, for my mind, the kind of the idea at the heart of them takes the reader into either an emotion or a place that doesn't feel too familiar. And that feels something that I can relate to. And that combination of freshness and relatability is very important. So hopefully that's of interest and use to you. And those certainly that's roughly speaking describes the sorts of things I'm looking for. So I hope that's of use. Thanks very much. Bye.